Hey guys, been wanting to do this for a while and just didn't really have the time to really fit it in yet until now. And so I thought I had some extra time today, so I figured I'd just do it today. And yeah, we'll get right into it. First of all, I just want to say that I have been a fan of the franchise of Tolkien and the universe for about 20 years now. It initially all started with my experience with the movies. So I started and I watched the films was when they came out in the theaters years ago, and that was my first introduction into the universe. And I was already pretty much sucked in at that point, like because just visually and just the storytelling, and I could go on for forever about the trilogy and how much I enjoyed that and everything. And and maybe I'll make another video about about those at some other point. But yeah, so with this being the case, that was my introduction in, and then some odd years later, I had read the book starting with Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and then some of the other works that were released at the time that I had wanted to kind of learn a little bit more about it. There's still some stuff that I haven't read, so I just want to point that out. So I don't know a lot about some of this about certain lore and things like that. So feel free to correct me. If I get something mixed up or something said wrong, I'd be happy for you to for you to correct me on it. But yeah, so it started with the films and the books, and then when I had heard that they were bringing a TV show in and they were going to do a new show about Lord of the Rings, first of all, I was just really excited about that. Like, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm on board. Like, you guys sold me 20 years ago, like, and with the books and everything, like, I'm all for it. And then as the details started coming out and we started hearing more about what it is, what we were actually getting, it ended up being set in a time that hadn't really been explored before. Actually, I hadn't been explored at all in the films or anything else really. And then the text, there's some texts and there's some books and things like that that kind of talk about certain things that happened during this time, but there really wasn't a lot out there. And so that being said, that's one of the many reasons why I'm not particularly versed on it anyway. But I was still excited about going back into Middle Earth, seeing everything, and being able to hit that point of time that we haven't seen before, and be able to see areas that are new to us, and places where areas that exist later on in the films and Lord of the Rings books that don't exist yet at this time. So we'll kind of see them come to life and things change and whatnot. And there's quite a big change in the show. And before I get into it, I just want to point out, yes, of course, this will be spoilers. The show's been out, I think, long enough for everyone who's wanted to watch it has had a chance to sit through and at least watch these eight episodes or so, this 8 hours of TV. And that being said, there's spoilers all around. Anyway, so being that we are getting introduced in this time and seeing these new locations and everything, like I was even more excited about that just because I love seeing the world and just the world building and learning about all different cultures. And there was one particular culture that I wasn't necessarily like I didn't necessarily dislike, but I wasn't as big of a fan of, and that's with the dwarves. Now I love Gimli and the dwarves and everything like that. As far as the Hobbit films go, I mean there were a couple so-so, but mostly yeah, I love those characters. So I didn't like have a dislike for them at all, but I don't know, it just wasn't part of the lore that I was particularly interested in as some of the other areas. But this show definitely brought that up for me. Like I am just like in it for the dwarves now because just seeing their home, like in this case, in Fellowship of the Ring, we see that they go down to the mines and they see the city, Dwarf City, is just like in ruins, just desolate. A bunch of bones everywhere, dwarves all got wiped out, whatnot. And in the show, we actually get to see, the city being alive and the culture like being present. very, very much so in the show, and I really love that aspect of the series. Durin and Disa and their kids. You get to see them a little bit, and then just seeing that Dwarven culture and just the I don't know the tension between him and his father, like the king, and then his wife, and then his friendship with Elrond. I thought it was really cool to kind of explore that kind of early on beginning. As you can see, he was friends with that line as it goes down, and we see Gimli later on. But yeah, it's definitely an aspect of the show that I particularly enjoyed a lot of in seeing that culture. And yeah, I'm excited to see more as far as we're going. Now, it's not necessarily going in a good way, like for what happened, in this towards the end of the season. If you know what I'm talking about, the depths, what lives down below, that was slumbering this whole time, and it's now awake. So that's not good news for the dwarves, but visually, I'm sure it'll be exciting to see it. Like it'll be with the effects and everything will be really cool. But it's going to be very sad for sure to see that beautiful dwarven world just brought to ruin. So that's going to suck. But outside of that, outside of the dwarven culture and everything, we get a lot of different storylines and elements, different cultures. You get the dwarves, the elves, the race of men, the humans, and the Harfoots, which bringing all these storylines in, it's kind of a lot to initially follow. And I don't think that it was done poorly. I think they did enough. I think they spent enough time with each one to where you kind of did be able to get attached to certain characters in each area, and get to learn more about them. Enough for I think for a first season, yeah, just kind of that introductory season, essentially. And it's difficult sometimes to juggle a lot of those different storylines, but I think they handled it really well. One particular storyline besides the dwarfs that I absolutely love, though, is the Harfoots. And I've always loved the hobbits and that hobbit lifestyle. The Shire is just a beautiful place to live, right? It's so green and lush, and they live such comfortable lives for the most part. They're chill. They have some squabbles here and there, as we know, but for the most part, they're pretty comfortable, like simple. I don't know if simple is the right word, but you know what I mean. Like not a lot happens there until a certain hobbit goes on his quest. And there were some other battles and stuff that were overlooked in the films and everything, but the Harfoots, though, they're, as we know, basically hobbits. I don't think they ever really use the word, but they're basically hobbits. The only difference with them is they don't have a shire, and I always felt that kind of sad, because they don't really have a place they can call home, so they're just kind of moving from place to place, getting their resources, just trying to survive. I mean, there's a lot out there that's dangerous, right? There's wolves, there's other creatures, monsters, there's orcs now. Orcs are going to start becoming a major problem in Middle Earth. I mean, they kind of alluded to in the first couple episodes, maybe that like they had appeared and had been fighting with the elves for a while, so and then they kind of disappeared, and just like things were peaceful, and then now they're back again, and we know kind of where this is going with the orcs and what they're planning. So it's not good because that's another danger for them. But yeah, they're moving from place to place, and in this group of Harfoots, we get introduced to the Brandyfoots, which are Nori. I'm blanking on what her dad's name is right now. I'm sorry. And then his wife, so her parents, and then I think they had some siblings in there. They weren't really that prominent in the show, so they were kind of more in the background. They had a few scenes there and there, and then she has her best friend Poppy, who's not Brandyfoot, but she's basically a sister, like best friend to Nori, and we get introduced to these characters pretty much right away in the show and the series, and then I love them honestly. Like I like I said, I love the hobbits, and Nori is just she's amazing. The actress, she's a lot of emotion, and she brings a lot of heart and a sense of adventure for the show, for the character, and I just always love the Hobbit. So I was definitely excited to see like each episode to kind of see where they were at, where they were going, and just right off the bat, basically, she comes across this comet falls from the sky, right, and then she comes across this stranger who we all, for the most part, pretty much know who it is. I mean, they didn't really say, but they did, if you follow the clues there. And she meets a stranger, and they get well, he gets found out by Nori and Poppy actually, because they go to investigate, and they go find him. And she kind of has to do this thing where she, has to keep him quiet, because she doesn't want the other villagers, like the other Harfoots, to know, like, about him, because, big people, they're scary, they're dangerous, who knows what they're going to do to, their people and their village. And so she has to kind of do this thing where she has to keep him quiet, so they don't find out. But of course, he gets discovered, and they find out they don't find out all of who he is, but he gets introduced to the rest of the group, and at first they're afraid, of course, because it's a big, scary, like, human, tall guy, right? And the rules, I guess, are pretty strict as far as outsiders, and as far as, like, don't go off on your own. They just this whole song, nobody walks alone, something like that. I forget. It's like this chant that they do. And then he gets brought in, and over time they spend time with him, and they get to know him, and just honestly, that storyline is just really interesting with his character and his origin, and I'm excited to see where they go with it in the following seasons. And at the end of the series, or the season, I should say, he goes off with Nori, so they've created this bond between them throughout the show, and he goes off with her at the end. And there's this really heartbreaking scene of her, like, leaving her family, but her family knows that, like, she has this need of adventure, and, like, she has to go out and, like, see the world. She can't just stay in their little world, their little bubble. And so they send her off to go with him to help him find out more about who he is. And there's this little scene between her and her best friend, who initially kind of just was like, okay, well, see you later, like, bye, at first. And then as she's later on, as she's actually leaving, we see that, obviously she's sad about it, and they have this little moment between them. And it's very similar to the in Fellowship with the Frodo-Sam thing, except in this case, Sam actually goes with Frodo, instead of in the show where she doesn't go with Nori. And there's an explanation for that, I think, as far as her needing to stay behind to help them with their trail and their travels, because their leader, Sadoc, who we also get introduced to in the series, he has an untimely demise, unfortunately, at the end of season 1. So she's got to basically help take over that job and help them travel. So that scene between them was very sad, though. Like, just thinking about it now. And like I said, she goes off on her own, and honestly, it makes sense. Like, just the way things were going, the direction of that makes sense. So I'm excited to see where they're going next. And now with the other characters that we get introduced into, because there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of characters here that we get introduced to in this first season. So some, might have been worried that it was too much, but like I said, I don't think it was. I think they did a good job with it. But other than the dwarves and the Harfoots, they mentioned we got the elves. Now, Galadriel, who's, technically, she's a protagonist of the show. I mean, there's so many different characters, and you do spend a lot of time with Nori and some of the other characters, but I guess she's kind of the main one because she was always there from the beginning, like, being an elf and being alive for thousands of years. She gets roped into this world with everyone because her brother dies in battle at some point years before, and they showed it at the beginning of the show, and she believes that he was searching for, which is probably the case, and I might just be misremembering, but she believes that he was searching for Sauron, who we know is he's a bad guy, right? And she continues on this quest to go searching for him, and then just takes her crew with her of like other elf soldiers that she has because she's the commander of the northern army of the elves, and she kind of pushes him a little bit too far, I guess. And the elf, their high king, Gilgalad, he's like, no, I can't let you go on this quest anymore. It's too dangerous. Like, you got to go back home, like back to the promised land, essentially. And just like, we need to get out of Middle Earth. Like, we're done here. There's no more, like, Sauron's gone. They haven't found him or anything. Like, we're done. And so they're packing up to leave, and she is kind of forced with him and even her best friend that we find out, her best friend, Elrond, who, between the two of them, they have just like such great chemistry. The two, well, not even just the actor and the actress, but just the two characters, and just seeing that like best friend almost kind of like brother sister kind of relationship that they have. You got a little bit of a taste of it in the extended versions of the films, but you didn't really get to see their history that much. So I'm glad that they're able to bring these characters in now and at a younger time in their lives, and we'll be able to see them actually like create that strong bond that they have. And I love all of their scenes together. Like, they just play off each other so well. And basically, Elrond and the High King, tell her that she's gotta hightail it out of there, right? We're done. But she's like, no, like, I know that Sauron's like still alive. He's still out there. Like, the evil's not dead. So she stays. Her company, her soldiers, have to basically abandon her. Like, they just, it's not really a mutiny, but they just say, peace out. And then she's kind of left on her own in that sense. And then they're actually get to the point of where they're traveling in the boat back to their land, back to where they came from. And she's like, no, screw this. So she jumps out of the boat in the middle of the ocean and just starts swimming right back to Middle Earth. And I'm not exactly sure how far out she got on the boat, but I would assume it's pretty far because it seemed like they were traveled out pretty far and almost basically home at that point. And then she ends up just swimming. Like, all right. I mean, I was like, she's not going to swim that whole way. Like, no way. She's going to come across a boat or something, which eventually she actually does. And that's where we get introduced to another new character that's an original character for the show, actually. So he doesn't exist in any of the previous Lord of the Rings material or anything. Halbrand, this human character. And there's something off about him kind of initially, right? Like, something kind of weird. And he rescues her from the water because their ship and their people and everything are just like stranded out there after they got attacked by some sea monster, and that thing was terrifying, by the way. Ugh. You do see it at some point, a little bit of it, and they ended up traveling together. And then there was a few other people with them still stranded on this, like, it's not really even a boat. It's like pieces of a boat. I don't know, just wood planks or whatever that they're like floating on to survive. And they get taken out as Halbrand. He kind of like sacrifices them to save his own skin. And as he rescues Galadriel, who gets pulled in or whatever and gets captured. So he rescues her, and then they together are now just alone on the water. And then they're just on their way back to Middle Earth. So they eventually do get back to Middle Earth, and some crazy stuff happens, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But with those characters, they're like I said, there's something kind of iffy about him, and she's just so determined to finish her quest. So we do get to see her kind of take that a little further, which is pretty cool. And while they're stranded out in there, not only do we get introduced to his new character, Halbrand, we also get introduced to another new elf character, Arondir, and he's stationed somewhere, I forget where. My apologies. And he's having to watch over. He's basically essentially in this tower and has this job of watching over. He's been watching over these humans, these people for this village and these people for a long time, and just hanging out, right, doing his job. And we find out that he actually has a love interest in a woman in the village, Bronwyn. And I wasn't completely on board with another kind of like elf human relationship thing because, Aragorn and Arwen, they're like this, like they're like this, they're so close, right? And their relationship is really great to see in the films. It was done really well in that, and expanded a bit more in the books, as I recall. But that was like peak level, like human elf relationship, right? That was like the tippy top, right? He's like the king, right? So I was like, I guess they're kind of just they want to do another one just to kind of, I don't know if it's just meant to be like a homage to the films and things like that and those characters. And I wasn't on board with it, but I definitely grew to like really care about like their relationship and them like surviving the stuff that they ended up going through. And the difference there is that she also has a son, Theo, and we don't know his dad. We don't know who his dad is. Like I think that's still a mystery. And there's a lot of theories out there as to who he is and his dad and whatnot, and who he might become. So I'm interested to see if any of those pan out. But yeah, so she has a son, and he's not really a fan of elves, and essentially humans aren't really a fan of elves at this point. There's a lot of negative history there between humans and elves, and so he gets a bit made fun of for his mom, like having the hots for an elf, basically. Because I don't know exactly how together they are, like at least initially, because it doesn't really seem there's not even like a kiss or anything that romantic in between them early on. But you can see the way that they look at each other; they have those feelings, and so he gets made fun of for basically having a mom who's an elf lover, and it's just frowned upon, basically. So seeing that, is just like, well, that kind of sucks for him, because it's not really his fault. And I honestly just like, I'm like super into that relationship now. Like I want them to go on. So spoiler alert, they're still okay by the end of season 1. They're together still and they're alive. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in like invested in that relationship now by the end of season 1. So, but I do really like his character a lot. He's just as badass, like kind of stoic initially elf warrior guy. He's exceptionally good with the bow, of course, right? Because he's been training for years and he's a cool elf guy, right? So he's got these really cool. I love like the action scenes with him and his bow, and he's got all these trick shots and just like headshots, just instant kill all these orcs like in several on several occasions, which is really cool. But there is one part where basically they're investigating something that's going on in the area. They find out that there's this cow that's sick. They're like, okay, what's going on? Like it doesn't look healthy. It looks like just diseased or something. and they found out that the cow was grazing in an area not far from there. That seems to be in the grass. Something's wrong with the grass, right? Something's wrong with the ground. It's I don't know, infected with something. And so he goes, of course, he goes off to investigate, right? He wants to see what's going on. And I believe she goes with him. I can't recall, but I believe she goes with him. And he discovers that there's these tunnels that are like being built underneath like this town or whatever. Like, what the hell is going on, right? And it turns out that they were actually built by the orcs. And there's a really good reason for that. And I thought that the reason for it was really cool. I didn't expect it, and definitely took me by surprise. It's like I should have seen it coming, right? But I didn't. But after he kind of figures out that there's these tunnels and everything, he gets captured by the orcs. And then during his capture, we get introduced to a new character, or the orc leader, Adar, which, if I'm saying that right, which I believe basically just means father, or lord, or something like that. He's the leader, and that's like an elvish word. And he's not an orc though. So, I mean, not in the way of like the kind of deformed, like little goblin-y looking orc things that we see, which hats off to like the makeup team and stuff like that, man. Those guys looked really cool. Like, as far as the details, that was really cool. But just like the films, honestly, it looked just like it. But yeah, so he gets captured and he gets introduced to this. We get introduced to this character and find out that he has basically a plan here to take over the land, and he's using his orcs to kind of take care of these villages and do this digging and everything. And he's just trying to help kind of take over. And there were a lot of theories that like he might be, Sauron directly himself, which I didn't believe was the case. Just because there's this whole overarching mystery of, who is Sauron? Like, where is he? Where has he been hiding? And I didn't really believe that he was, but that was a little theory going there. But I did believe that he was connected with them in some way. But then we find out that he admits that he killed Sauron at some point later on. And so it's just like, well, okay, I guess he thinks he killed him, because we know he's not dead. Like, he's not dead, right? He's out there somewhere still. So it's just a matter of, when he's going to pop up, right? And so after Arondir is captured, he eventually does escape, and then they have this plan to take on the orcs and protect their village, because the orcs are like the town that they're in, the area that they're in. They're like, we want to Adar, and he's like, we want to take this over, and like he even releases him. That's the reason that he essentially escapes, because he doesn't really just actually escape. He's like, I'm going to give you a message, go deliver this message, and then we'll see what happens, right? And so they basically send him off. He goes to deliver the messages, and they say that like they need to leave, or like side with him or whatever, like, otherwise we're coming and we're going to kill all you. And there's this really cool scene where they get all the orcs into one area, through like, you go through this gate and everything. It's just like in this like fortress kind of, and there's this big tower right next to like the where they're all standing or whatever. And they ended up getting all the orcs in there, and then he shoots an arrow, a flaming arrow actually, to like break the ropes and like everything, the support that's holding up the tower, and it just crumbles down on top of all of them. And I thought that was a really cool effect. So that was definitely exciting to see. So besides the elves, right, we have the men characters, the human characters. And Halbrand specifically, as I mentioned, he was met with Galadriel, and they eventually get back to Middle Earth, but not before they get captured. I mean, I'd say captured, but it's not really captured by this ship captain, and we find out that Elendil, Isildur's father from the films that we see at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, who his sword gets broken and he gets taken out by Sauron, and his son picks up the sword. So we get to see his character introduced at an early time in his life, and he actually brings them to his island home of Numenor, which is where a lot of the humans kind of that bloodline and things like that of like the kings and stuff all kind of originated from, if I'm understanding correctly. And they eventually make their way to Middle Earth at some point and build like Gondor and all those other like kingdoms and whatnot, Rohan, all that. But he brings them to Numenor. Just mixing up my words here. He brings them to Numenor, and they meet the Queen Regent there, who absolute like badass character, by the way, and just an amazing actress. And I'm excited to see where they're going with her as well. But they bring Galadriel and Halbrand to him. It was like, okay, so what are you guys doing here? Like, what do you want? That's why I say captured, because they weren't really, I mean, they were captured, but they weren't like arrested or anything, or like put in jail or anything. So they get brought before the queen, and then Galadriel's like, I need to ship back to Middle Earth. Like, I need it right now. Like, I need to go because I need to finish my quest. And Halbrand's like, well, maybe we should stay for a bit, you know, like try to get on their good side before we piss them off and actually go to jail, right? And so they kind of work something out to where they stay for a little bit, and they get a chance to kind of mingle with the Numenorians and everything. But while she's there, she ends up investigating the sigil that we've seen earlier on. And I don't have an image or anything of it that I can show you, but if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. And we find out the sigil is actually it's kind of like a map, I guess, of the Southlands. And so I was like, oh, well, the Southlands are, as I forgot to mention before, the Southlands are where Bronwyn and like Arondir and everything, like that's where they are in the Southlands. The Southlands are the area that Adar's trying to take over. And so she's like, well, this looks a lot like this particular area, so it's not just a sigil, it's like a map or like this area that, you know, of great importance, basically. And she ends up investigating that, you know, finding that out about, and then she's like more than adamant now to go back to go back home. And she doesn't end up going right away. She actually ends up getting jailed for a minute, like just because she kind of pushed things a little bit too far. And in her jail time, we spend a little bit more time with the queen and kind of their concerns that they have about, you know, this outsider being there and what it really means coming forward, because we find out that her father, the king, who's been in this tower in their town, just up there, and he hasn't been seen in public for like years, and he's just kind of a reclusive guy up in the tower. And we find out that I don't know if it's because he had it and then she gave it to him, or if she found it, but essentially she had a Palantir, like one of those all-seeing, you know, orb things that Saruman had in his tower. And as we know, those things are extremely dangerous and not to be used lightly. But she uses it, and there's this one scene, I think in episode maybe 3 or 4, where it opens up with her, and she's in this meeting with all these parents and everything. I'm assuming that they're like just like mothers and stuff like that, because there's all these babies with them, which, you know, it was a cute scene there for a second. But she ends up in that sequence where she's talking to them, and then all of a sudden you hear this like rumbling and like just sounds in the background. Doesn't sound good basically. And then the craziest thing happens where the whole like just city just starts getting destroyed. And if you know anything about the Tolkien and Lord of the Rings lore, you know that Numenor eventually falls. Basically, it's like Rome. Eventually gets destroyed and just wiped out. And she has this vision of that basically, and now she's like, well, shoot, is this the coming of the elf? Is this like the start of this, the end of this kingdom? And so she ends up deciding that she needs to go with Galadriel, with the elves, to Middle Earth to try to stop whatever evil that's coming. And I may have skipped over a few things here and there, but just trying to hit some of the highlights here, just so we can kind of talk about everything. And she goes with him to Middle Earth, and they end up in this really cool battle scene towards the end of the series with the Southlands and everything, and the orcs that come. Because basically, the Southlands, like Arondir and everything, they kind of won the battle at the beginning when the orcs came. Like I said, the tower fell and everything, but there were plenty of more orcs, so it really didn't really seem to really do that much of it. But it didn't make much of a difference anyway. And so once they found out about that, a lot of the villagers, like half of the villagers, were like, "Yeah, I'm not going to get wiped out by these orcs and this guy. I'm going to go side with him." And there's this one like older kind of gentleman character, and I didn't really think he was that great, like as a good person initially. In early on, this older guy that lives in the village, he definitely seemed sketchy at first, and he ended up siding with the bad guys. And so yeah, a bunch of them ended up siding with the bad guys, so they basically lost that battle, and then the Numenorians have to come on and like rescue them at some point. So they show up just in time to save everyone. There's this really cool scene with where Galadriel like cuts this orc's head off and stuff and everything, on her horse. Like it sounds like a normal thing, but the way they did it was was pretty crazy. And while that's all going on, we find out, kind of going back to the dwarves here, that well, the dwarves and the elves, I should say, with Durin and Elrond, they have this kind of strained relationship initially at the beginning, because for whatever reason Elrond was away from Durin for like 20 years, just, I don't know, doing whatever he was doing, which is like no time to an elf, but to a dwarf. He missed like his marriage and his children being born and all that. So he missed these huge milestones in Durin's life. So he was kind of pissed off at him about that. But they ended up eventually talking and even sitting with his wife Disa, who is awesome, by the way. Her character is really cool. I like her character a lot, and she kind of helps, kind of bring them together again with just being there and like kind of talking some sense into her, like, come on, like, it's not like he meant to abandon you, things like that. And so they make up, and it turns out that what am I trying to say? It turns out that the elves believe that, especially the High King, he believes that their light, essentially their life force, is fading. And there's this one scene when the comet first that I talked about earlier, the comet that comes down to crash down, that brings a stranger. It kind of passes over, and then there's this part where everyone's it cuts to different characters, and they're all kind of looking up at the sky. And there's this one part where the High King, he picks up a leaf, and it looks like rotting, like just infested with like this black just ooze thing. It doesn't look good. It's bad news, right? And so it turns out that they believe that their light and their life force is kind of diminishing, and they need something to like help with that, or they gotta leave. Like, or they're just gonna be, they're gonna disappear. They're gonna end. Like all elves are just gonna go away. And so, in order to do that, they discover that within Khazad-dûm, within the mines, they a new element has been discovered, and it's a bit of a secret, kind of initially on, but pretty much everybody, even myself included, guessed right away that it was mithril, which we see. Which we see is the breastplate or armor that is given to, well, in the Hobbit, given to Bilbo, and then he gives it to Frodo. And they make, I'm sure they make like all their swords and other swords and armor out of everything. We know the material, right? And so it turns out that mithril is essentially the key to saving it, but mining it's a really dangerous thing. And so they, by the king's demand, the dwarf king, I should say, his demand, he says no, like, we're not going to do it. Like, we can't tempt this mountain with like this desired ore, because bad stuff's going to happen. Which he was actually right. I mean, if you know anything about what happens next, he was 100% correct about that. But it turns out it's really the only thing that they can use to help their people, the elves. They absolutely have like no other choice. So Durin goes down against his father's wishes, and goes to mine it, and discovers there's this whole chasm. I guess I don't know if that's the word, but this whole area that he breaks through in his wall and sees like veins of it, just tons of it going through the walls, and it's like, well, there we go. There's the salvation. But of course, the father shows up. He gets in trouble. It's not good. But prior to that, they had at some point mined a tiny piece of mithril, so they did have a tiny piece of it, and they ended up taking it to where they Eregion, I think is what it's called, where the elves, are basically set up to forge some kind of power, something they need to survive, basically. And Celebrimbor, who we know from lore, it was one of the makers of the Rings of Power, hence the the name of the show, right? So it took a bit, but we finally got there. And they take the ore there with him, and they're going to use it to make something, as we know, right? And so they take the ore, and they break it down and everything, and then initially they're thinking about just forging a crown to put on the king's head, on the elf king's head, High King, and just like that'll be enough power, but it's a lot of power for one person, right? And they were kind of concerned that maybe it might be too corrupting, I guess, is kind of the thought on that. And so they ended up deciding that they're going to make two objects. It's like, well, okay, so maybe two crowns, right? So one to kind of balance out the other. But that ultimately ends up not being a good idea, so they ended up making three objects. And turns out that those are the first three rings of power that they end up making. So while all that's going on, and initially while they're trying to figure out, about a crown, either a crown, two crowns, or a ring, we ended up getting essentially the reveal of the villain for the series. Probably going to be other villains, but the main overall villain that we've been, this guy we've been looking for, this Sauron's mysteriously disappeared, whatnot, and we end up getting revealed that it actually was Halbrand the whole time, which didn't surprise me. I mean, it was kind of surprising, but like at the same time, he did a lot of things and said a lot of things that was kind of weird. and suspicious. So I don't know. I'm not completely surprised at that, but it turns out that he reveals himself to Galadriel because she finds out that his family line, like this symbol that he's been wearing, this crest, he's supposed to be the returning king of the Southlands, right? Which actually makes a lot of sense if you tie all the pieces together here that are coming. But she finds out that that line that he is supposedly from, that kingdom or whatever they suppose are from, doesn't exist anymore and has been wiped out for like generations. And he actually claimed early on that he took it off of a dead man, which we're to believe that might have been, somebody that he knew or like someone in his family, right? Like it wasn't necessarily um, the fact that he like killed someone and took it. Like maybe he found it, right? And once he's revealed, he's basically just out. He's like, yeah, it's me. Like, and he tries to convince Galadriel to join his side, as the bad guys always do, right? And of course she says no. But it turns out that the Southlands is actually a very important part of Middle Earth, as it's to the east in Middle Earth, which we know where this is going, right? And there's this plan that they had I was talking about before with the tunnels. They were digging the tunnels, right? Well, basically, they end up using this sword that Theo, the son, found at some point early on in the series, and he's just been kind of keeping hidden. The sword is actually a key to some kind of shrine in the Southlands. And the old guy that I had mentioned before, the one that joined the sides, he ends up taking the sword and plunging it into the shrine and activating it, and it sends this water down through all the tunnels that were dug and everything. And we just follow this like crazy amount of water just coming down, going through the lands and everything, and then it falls. It goes into a cave, and then it falls down into this lake of lava, essentially, that we see. And I guess because of science, right? I mean, from what I understand, this actually is something that's possible. The amount of water and pressure like hits the lava and causes the mountain above to explode and erupt. And right away, Mount Doom is born. And so the Southlands gets transformed into Mordor. So there we have it. And so his plan of being king of the Southlands, or at least that kind of theory, not theory, but that whole thing about him being king of the Southlands actually makes a lot of sense, because essentially King Sauron is king of Mordor, right? That's his land that he lords over. And I just thought that was really cool. That whole effect of the mountain just erupts. And at this point, like the Numenorians have like gone to rescue the Southlanders and everything, as I mentioned before, and they're all just battling and everything. And then once they believe that they won, the mountain just explodes, and all these chunks of just like earth and everything, flaming rock, just fly down and just crash and everything, and just like essentially blackens the land, like just destroys like everything, and it just spreads out, and just desolate dark land of Mordor is born. And it was such a cool sequence, honestly. Like I was like, what? No friggin' way. And the way that they ended it too, like they had basically exploded the mountain, and when I think it was episode 6, they explode the mountain, and then it just basically the episode ends. It cuts off right there. Like, oh no, what's gonna happen? But yeah, I thought that was really cool. And Mordor is born basically, and I don't know if it happened that quickly in the in that time in the Second Age, everything, and if it had been around that long. But I guess, like I said, they had to squish things together, so they had to squish the timeline together, which is understandable given that the amount of resources that they had to work with to make the show, and they had to make a lot of things up. And with the birth of Mordor, that's brings in basically, where we lead into with Lord of the Rings. Now, going back to Nori, and everything, it's revealed, or at least pretty much revealed, that the stranger that she was with is a wizard, and it just so happens to appear that he, I believe in, lots of people believe that he's Gandalf, which I know is going to frustrate some people because he isn't supposed to be in Middle Earth at this time. It's a lot earlier in the time that he actually shows up. He's actually sent later on in the Third Age. I believe he comes by boat, and he is already there, I guess. So, but we'll see. I mean, it was never said explicitly that it was him, but it appears with a lot of the clues that we've gotten throughout the season that it basically is him. And his relationship with Nori is cool to see that, because it's like, well, okay, well, that kind of explains why he has such an affinity and such a love for hobbits, right? Because he spent all this time with them, and who knows what's going to happen, with season 2 and so on, as far as their adventures are going to grow and their bonds are going to grow, right? So I'm looking forward to seeing that expand upon more. So it's a good show. It's really enjoyable. There's a lot to it that could be frustrating for people that are fans of the lore. I can see that where they change things, but the studio wasn't given full access to like the whole estate, so they don't have access to all of the texts that are out there, and they had to take liberties and create their own storylines and things. But honestly, it's a great show. For myself, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I actually had some friends that I watched with it online, and we would say, and watch it together, and that was a lot of fun. I really like doing that, and hoping to get to do that again with them. But I also got my wife to watch it with me, because she had seen the films and everything with me, like not back then because I didn't know her back then, but at some point, we had sat and watched all the movies, and then we'd seen the Hobbit trilogy, like as they had come out. We had watched those, and she's familiar with it in that aspect, but she's not super familiar with a lot of the text or anything. Not as much as I am per se, but she watched the show with me, and I thought that was cool to bring her in to kind of share that with, because I've loved this franchise and this universe for a long time, and I still do, and I'm very much excited to see where they're going with it next. And we've got five seasons so far planned with this show. I mean, there's talks of them possibly doing spin-offs and things like that, so we'll see where that goes. But for now, we're set with the Rings of Power for these 5 seasons. And I guess if I was to give a rating, I mean, I don't like to do that necessarily, but I guess if I was to give a rating, I would give it probably an 8 out of 10. Just because there were a couple things that I wish they would have expanded on a little bit more of, but ultimately, I'd say an 8 out of 10. And I think is a good score for it. I feel comfortable with that, with that as a score. But yeah, I'll be sure to try to give my reviews as these seasons come out, so I can let you guys know. But yeah, it's a wonderful series. It's a good introductory for people too. I think if you haven't really seen the films or read the books, and you're like, oh well, Lord of the Rings, I've heard of that. Rings of Power. What is this? And you want to bring somebody in into the lore. I think it's a good introduction too, because while it does change some things, and like I said, changes the timeline of things a little bit. For someone like my wife, who's not like super into it or anything, or some other people that might not be, I think it still works as a good introduction into Tolkien and into Lord of the Rings. And I just honestly I can't wait to see what they do with it next. And I'll be sure to let you guys know my thoughts and everything on the continuing of the series. Anyway, thanks you for checking out my video here on this. Guess went a little a little long, but it's fine. It's whatever. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.